Okay, hi, welcome everyone. My name is Abeer Hoque, and I'm a writer and photographer. My parents were originally from Bangladesh, but I was born and brought up in Nigeria and now live in the States in New York. And I'm here with my dear friend Nupu Press, who is a writer and illustrator. And we're going to be in conversation together for the next half an hour. And I met Nupu actually through her blog. She used to have a blog many years ago, and she just has influenced my life in so many different ways, and some of the things we're going to talk about. But we've been in conversation about writing, about art, about travel, about wellness, about publishing. And so we'll talk about some of those things. But Nupu, would you tell us a little bit about what you're working on right now?
Sure. I'm working on an illustrated memoir on grief. It's not the most obvious. It's not obvious to illustrate a memoir on grief, which is perhaps why I wanted to go there, and not to make light of it at all, but to look at it in a way that I don't think I allowed myself to look at it before, and it's highly personal to be able to write about it and draw it.
I'm so looking forward to it. Nupu just brought out a book of essays last year called Seeing and Belonging, and she also just has a graphic memoir of her journey through the Camino that just came out days ago, now available. And she has a second one coming out actually just later this year. But we'll talk a little bit about that. I'll tell you just a little bit about my work. I write memoir, fiction, short fiction, and long fiction as well. I have a memoir called Olive Witch, and I also have a collection of short stories that includes photographs and poems. And I have a coffee table book of photos and poems as well, and I'm working on a novel. So I like all the genres, which I think, leads us nicely to our first kind of topic, which is about mashing the genres and what that means to us. So, and also one of the themes of the festival, which is about how language is or isn't in the way that we can accurately kind of talk about our lives, or whether it can be used in, kind of more subterfuge spaces. But one of the things that I love to do is I'm a photographer as well. So I often will have photographs along with my prose or poetry. My very first book was a coffee table book. It's a travel photograph book, but I had put poems in there. And in my other book of short stories, I have stories that are accompanied by, they're fictional short stories accompanied by real pictures, real photographs. And one of the things I really love about that is how you can tell a story in different ways and how you can tell a story without words. And it sort of bridges that, it like kind of leaps over that barrier we have with language, and some of the problems that we have with language saying something or meaning something else. And I like that. I love that kind of other dimension that we get. I feel like combining prose, poetry, and photographs lets me tell more of the story than I would be able to with just words alone. So Nupu also has similar inclinations towards combining genres. Do you want to talk about how you use that as well?
Sure. I think it might be interesting to understand how I got into that, because it illustrates what the issue was for me at the time. Because so I actually was drawing and painting all through my teens, and then I got to about age 20, and I was studying in the US at the time. So I was also born in Bangladesh, but not raised here. Sorry, you weren't born here. You were born in Nigeria, but you're from Bangladesh. Your family's from Bangladesh, and so my family's from Bangladesh. I was born here, but I wasn't raised here. I was raised in Kuwait, and then I came back for a few years, and then I was in the US and Italy for studying. And I had terrible depression, all through my university years. And something just made me shut down everything that I knew in my life and that I used to love. And so not only did I stop drawing and painting, I destroyed everything that I had ever done.
Wow.
And then I didn't do it for almost 30 years. And I didn't feel like it had a place in my life. I actually switched to photography, your medium, in college. But honestly, I was not a good photographer. And I can say that very genuinely. I really know good photography, and that was just not my medium. And then I worked in film production for more than 25 years. But on the production side, I wasn't creative in the ways that I had originally wanted to be, which was to tell my own stories. And so during the pandemic, I just came to a point where I had to kind of confront myself and realize that if I'm going to stay in film production, working as a film producer, all I'm doing is enabling other people's stories to be told, which is very noble and beautiful. But I had this tremendous urge to tell my own stories as well. And I just felt like there was some part of me that was completely lost. So I knew that I had to leave film, because film is such an expensive genre as well. It's not something I could kind of quietly do on the side and then present it to the world. But leaving film and everything that I knew in the middle of a pandemic also caused massive depression. And it was out of the depths of that depression that I returned to art, just because I didn't know how else to articulate what I was feeling inside. So I started to draw cats, as one does. That is the beginning of all art form, I think, is to draw cats. I would draw a cat every single day, and it just kept me going. And then I found that I started to learn watercolor, and then I just started to draw the pictures. And then I started to bring in my language of words into the same pages. I can show an example of my Camino book, of combining art and text, which is now the medium that I use. But really, going back into art came out of not knowing how to articulate what I was feeling inside. And the only way I could do that was through images. And so it's very interesting in terms of what we think of as language, because to me, that was a language. It was a way of communicating, just not with words.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a different sensibility you get from art than you do from writing. I feel like I've been told actually that my photography has a different vibe than my words. And I see that in other people's work as well. Like you can get a different feeling. And there's something just really lovely about being able to share your work with people who don't maybe share your language. You can do that with photography or with art without having to actually even speak to them at all, which is such a powerful thing.
It is. And I wonder if you could also talk about how you combine certain photographs with certain poetry, because I also think your photography is really atmospheric. It really has a very, very strong sense of mood, which is actually really difficult to do. It has a very clear sense of space and time. And your poetry can also be very, very specific to a certain moment, but their photography leads to a bigger canvas. So, how would you choose to put certain images and poetry together and things like that? That would be very interesting for me to know.
Yeah, I've been working on a very, very slowly working on a collection of photo poems, is what I call them, which are, it was a way for me to get back to poetry, which has always been my first love. And so I had stopped writing poetry when I started writing a lot of prose and wanted to get back to it. And so I looked at just photographs that I thought were interesting, not necessarily the best photographs I had taken, but ones that I thought kind of evoked a feeling or a memory for me. And I would start writing poems about that. And it wasn't necessarily about what was happening in the photograph. Maybe it was something to do with the mood of the photograph or the color scheme or the season or whatever it was. And for me, it was like kind of a jumping off point. And again, that sort of largesse of not actually matching one to the other is that space that you get from combining these genres is actually the space that feels to me is true to life, because there are so many layers that we can never articulate, and ones that we don't know how to say. not just don't know, we don't even know they're there sometimes, right? And so I love that it allows the space for that. Those two, combining those two genres can allow the space for that. But yeah, and I really like that. It's also something that I think anyone can do. Anyone can take a picture and anyone can write about it. And it feels very egalitarian, just in the Audre Lorde, quote, about poetry is for everyone. It's not an elitist art. And so I think that's one of the things. Personal story also, I think, and I teach a course on personal story, on memoir, and I find that everyone has a story to tell. And so that's I think something you and I also share, like the memoir, personal story motivation. I just find it to be such a powerful form of first just expressing yourself, but also just creating connections and community. Because people, I really sincerely believe you can change the world with just telling your story as honestly as you can, as clearly and as vulnerably as you can. With that story, with all the stories together, we can see how we're all connected. So that would be my vision of the world, is if we can like learn to actually live with each other with more harmony, with more compassion, with more kindness. I think it would be helped along if we all were able to also just tell our stories.
I completely agree. And I also think there's something about the memoir form which certainly allows me to present myself in a way with a kind of honesty that I may not even think about saying to family and friends, but somehow in the space of writing it down, it comes out there. And that when that is shared, it feels like it has a real possibility for connection. And I have to also say that for really many decades, I completely disregarded nonfiction, certainly memoir, because I'm a big diary writer, and I religiously kept a diary since the age of 12. But there was because it came easily to me, I completely thought it had no value, because I would write my best work in my diary. And I used to always think like, oh, if only I could write my fiction this way.
Right.
And you write fiction. And I also tried to write fiction. I've got 5 completed novels sitting in my drawer. But I just couldn't believe that, given the amount of suffering I went through to create the fiction, that how could writing about my own life have any value? Because right. I didn't even think that was very interesting, but also that I didn't think that something that came easily was supposed to have any value. So I think that's also very interesting, because I think a lot of people create work quite naturally and don't even consider that is something that other people may be interested in. So I always think that's very great, that you help other people present their work as well. Yeah. Put that together, present that work. Yeah. You must see that in a lot as they kind of realize what value that work has.
Yeah. I think, yeah, when I was in my MFA program, I started writing little stories from my childhood. They were just like 2 or 3 page stories. And I didn't think anyone was going to find them interesting, because they were just like, a game that we played like when we were like 7 with my sister and a friend. And it was one of my most popular stories in workshop. It was set in a place that no one knew anything about, this like little town in Nigeria. A game that made absolutely no sense. Like there was no goal in some ways. We were just running around, shouting numbers at each other. And it made me realize, from just how people responded to this story, that it doesn't matter actually how big the story is or how small it is. In fact, just the specificity and like the idea of, yeah, just kids' games, that is universal. And that's what people were responding to. And that's when I understood that anyone could write about that, right? Like anyone could write about the little stories of their childhood or their adult lives, and people would respond as long as it was told with, vulnerability and clarity.
Yeah. Can I show you an example of something that just reminded me of that?
Yeah.
So when I walk, so this is from my Camino diary. So I walked the Camino de Santiago in Spain, which is a pilgrimage trail. And so I was having a lot of trouble, and I was sharing the pages live on each day on social media as I was walking it. And I found that it was it was a big deal for me. I didn't realize that it seemed to resonate, but there was a day when I realized, because I was clearly wearing the wrong shoes. And I tried a couple of times to buy new shoes and nothing was working. And I was ready to give up and go home. So it was, I had a lot at stake here. And then so there was the day that I found my new shoes and they were neon orange. And I was so kind of aghast. I was like, I can't walk around Spain with neon shoes. And I was like, oh, I just, needs must. And so, and they saved my feet. And so it was extraordinary. The number of people who told me, your orange shoes, the day you got the shoes, I was so happy for you. I was like, really? I knew I was happy. I didn't realize it would affect you in any way. It is shocking how many people have said that to me. And it is such a small, in the bigger scheme of life, such a small thing.
Yeah.
But there is something about the specificity, the vulnerability, and all of that that comes out in those moments that I think really does resonate. And there's something in that. Yeah.
I will say, we'll move on to the next topic, but one of my oldest friends just came to visit, and I was showing him your book, and his wife was leafing through it, and she just stopped at the page that talks about your love for your underwear. And there's like this one page about like, oh, my lovely underwear. And, again, that's like just an example of something that no one would ever maybe think to write about or draw, but you did both. And it is just, I just totally she spent like 5 minutes on that page, right?
Oh.
I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about publishing, which is something that I often talk about usually with some measure of irritation, frustration, and depression. It's kind of, and we're coming at it from different angles. I think we have like some knowledge about the US market, the UK market, the Bangladesh market, and we've sort of gone through this in different ways. Have been working primarily in the US and Indian market. Like my books were published I did my first book actually self-published in Bangladesh. I printed it here because it was, cheaper. You could have agency, do it yourself. My other two books have been published by HarperCollins India, and then were published by 360 in the States and the UK. Publishing is just like kind of a nightmare scenario, I think, for any beginning writer, and and onwards, actually. You have to have an agent in the States if you want to get a big publisher. The big publishers don't look at books that are submitted by individual authors. They'll only look at books that are submitted by agents. Finding an agent is another whole game in itself. I published 2 of my books without an agent. And now I have an agent, and I haven't finished this novel yet, but I'm like, yeah, it feels like I have to keep kind of just grinding on, like it's a numbers game. I have to just keep sending my stuff out to literary magazines, to, now I have an agent, but now she'll have to like submit whatever I write to publishing houses and see whether it gets out there. And what I've just sort of made my peace with the idea that I'm not going to make money from my writing. Because even if I did, say, sell a book for, I don't know, $50,000, which is like a lot of money for like maybe a mid-range kind of author might make that much. But that's one book that maybe took you several years to write and would get you through maybe 2 years in New York if you were super thrifty like I was, like I am. But if you have a family or debt or whatever else, like it's not a great way to live. So I always have another job, which I've had for the 20 years that I've been a writer now. I've always had a part-time job, which means that I have less money than I want, but enough time to write, and it pays my bills, like just barely pays my rent and my food and all those other kinds of things. And it's not a bad life. I live a very large life. As people who know me, I am able to just sort of, I'm also a master budgeter. I think I'm just very good about how I, funnel my money in different ways. So I'm able to, to live the kind of life I want, but it's not because my writing is kind of getting me there. that's actually that. So that's my publishing story. I don't know. I'm curious about how you sort of approached it, the publishing game.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I did want that. What you have, that's what I had aspired to. So when I mentioned this 5 novels sitting in my drawer, I did actually send those out. I was not. I think I was very insecure because I started this in my mid-20s, and it was one book for every decade basically, and it was at the very early rejections, which I know and I knew then that that's just, it's like you said, it's a numbers game and just have to keep sending it out. But it just made me feel so personally rejected that I just put it away in the drawer and said, okay, I'm going to write another one, and I'm going to write another one, I'm going to write another one, and I did. And when it came time to the illustrated book, so with this one, I didn't even send it out because at this time I felt, I don't know if I want to have a gatekeeper decide my fate. And so that was the intention. I sat on it for a year and a half, waiting to feel ready to do it. And I just didn't. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to bring it out myself. And like you, I decided to do one print version in Bangladesh because it was affordable, and they've done a really great job. Very happy with it. And to have it be available now, because Amazon is available around the world, and if it's available on Amazon, it's kind of available in most places. So that's the route that I chose to do: print on demand and ebook on Amazon, and then a print version for Bangladesh because there's no Amazon here. And it's been a huge learning curve. I'm still learning a lot. I'm going to do the same for the second book. An artist friend of mine yesterday was trying to convince me for the grief memoir to not do it self-published. He thought that this was a book that should have wider, just should be on more bookshelves, and that will only happen really if it goes through a big publisher. I was first like, no, I'm going to do it myself. And after so now I'm like, okay, well, I'll think about it. I'm still a while away. I think that there's pros and cons to both. And I think in the best of all worlds, that the kind of things that, I often worry that if you're presenting something that does not already have a knowable market where publishers know how to slot you, then it becomes quite difficult for them to have the imagination to stretch to accommodate something that might be unique. But I think I would love to leave distribution to a publisher, a major publisher. I would love it if they brought their expertise to make my book better. There's nothing I would like more. But I had to weigh that up with how long am I willing to wait until that happens? Am I willing to wait 5 years, or do I want to bring up my book? And maybe further down the line, I can have that conversation with the publisher and say, look, these are the books I've done on my own. Combined with both sides, maybe we can make it even better, But I think I just didn't want to wait. And so I'm really glad I bit the bullet, and I still needed a lot of support, and it did need some upfront money. So it's not a whole lot, completely manageable. But I hired a designer to make sure it looked professional. I had great printers. And if I wasn't my whole thing is handwritten, but if it wasn't handwritten, I would have worked with an editor to make sure that the text was also strong. This was literally a diary, so there wasn't any editing to do. But I think somewhere the combination of our two worlds is probably right. Somewhere is the sweet spot. Yeah.
I would hope so. Yeah. I mean, because I came out of business school, I had a very, just an idea that, okay, I'm going to have a spreadsheet. I'm going to get like my 99 rejections out of the way and get my first publication, and that was going to be, and there's these beautiful essays out there about rejection and just collecting rejections, but it does require such a thick skin and just the kind of a drive and determination to just keep sending your stuff out. And that's what I tell my students. I teach a class on writing personal statements and applying for grants and residencies. And that's the thing that I keep telling them over and over again is just to make a habit of just sending your things out. But again, I really love the route that you've chosen for these two books anyway. And Yeah, a middle ground would be great. Would be great.
Well, I mean, you got a very prestigious fellowship, so of course you're completely qualified to talk about writing those applications. I wanted to take that course actually.
Yeah, no, I love that
Terrifies
course.
me.
I'm sort of in this sweet spot where I've won a couple of, big prizes, but not enough that I can live off of anything that I've won. And so I have the experience of having and for each of those things that I've won, I've gotten rejected from like, way more, like, maybe 75% more than I've gotten. So I have a lot of experience with it, which is, yeah, why I can maybe have a leg to stand on to talk about it. But we have only a few minutes, but maybe we can talk about one of the topics that's dear to my heart, and that I've always, when I was reading your blog, I feel like my skincare routine has always been influenced by you, even now, from like 10 years ago and now as well. Well, wellness and mental health, physical health, skincare, all of these things are things that I think are really ways that we have ways of connecting with each other and learning from each other that we didn't before. Just also related to the internet. I also find the internet to be kind of a terrible place, but also a place where I found incredible community and ways to, to share and also connect with other people. But I don't know, do you have, it's a complicated question, so I don't know how you want to wade into that one.
Well, the book I'm working on right now, Knee Deep in the Grief Memoir, that is a lot about mental health and not what happens when you don't deal with trauma. So it's a subject very, very close to my heart because I haven't dealt with mine for more than 40 years. So that, but certainly on the other side, I do absolutely love all that stuff about, I'm such a geek when it comes to research. So I have a thing where every year I'm going to do a deep dive into something that I feel like I need to know more about. So one year was about personal finance. I spent a year just reading all kinds of books about savings, investing, personal wealth, inheritance laws and things. And I have a very complicated tax structure because I pay taxes in multiple countries. So all of it had to be juggled. But then by the end of the year, I felt like, oh, now I know this thing that I had been really kind of intimidated about. So likewise, I did that about skincare a couple of years ago. I was like, I'm just going to figure out my skincare. I'm going to do a deep dive. I'm going to read everything. I'm going to research all the stuff. I'm going to try out all these different things from different places and natural remedies and all kinds of things. So now I feel like, okay, now I'm kind of in a good place. And now I kind of feel like I've kind of have the things that I need to not spend all my time, now that I know the things that work for me, now I can just get on with it, which is how I felt about the finance. So yeah, I love these deep dives. And so I love doing that and then being able to share that information.
I would, highly recommend it, Substack, because she has a lot of that really amazing information. I just eat it up. I'm currently using her face oil, actually, literally hers, because I just took her bottle, but it's almost finished. I was like, I could use this.
I did not make it. It sounds like I made it. I didn't make it. But I do make some of it, which is going to go into another illustrated book one day about everything I own, because I live out of a suitcase. I don't have a home. So I live literally out of one suitcase, a carry-on suitcase size. So everything has to be dry because I can't carry liquids. So that's, So that.
Love it. I mean, I'm a traveler, but who takes it to another level?
I would like to actually find a home one day soon. So let's see, fingers crossed. Yeah.
I think we're out of time.
Should we just
finish with our last question, which is just
a
fun one, which is just what age would you go back to if you could? I'm going to say that I actually love my age right now. I'm about to turn 51 in like 3 hours. And year 50 was great. 40s were also amazing, but I feel like I've come to a place where my ambition and my abilities are more aligned than they ever were before. But if I would go back to an age, probably age 26, when I was right before I tore up my first knee, and I was in the best shape of my life and was just a young nubile thing with everything I had.
I
Maybe
yeah,
that year, although most of my 20s were terrible. So anyway, I'll hop over.
right. I agree. I'm 52, and I feel like I'm much more at peace now than I ever have been in my life. But I have to say, rather than going back to a year, I really think each year is going to keep getting better, and I can't wait for my 60s, because I think I'm just going to be like, this is me, take it or leave it. This is it. Yes, I'm pitching forward.
I love it. Okay, I didn't even think about that. Of course, this is why, yeah, you need writers and artists to kind of make you think in different ways. But thank you, Nupu. This is far too short, and I could talk to you for hours. So,
likewise. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you,
bye,
everyone.
everyone.